Chapter 5, Section 1. How Populations Grow. Sea otters are important members of the kelp forest community of America's Pacific Northwest coast. This forest is made up of algae called giant kelp, with stalks up to 30 meters long, and smaller types of kelp. The kelp forest provides a habitat as well as food source for a variety of animals. Sea otters need a lot of energy to stay warm in cold water, so they eat large quantities of their favorite food, sea urchins. Sea urchins, in turn, feed on the kelp. The relationship along this food chain set the stage for a classic tale of population growth and decline. A century ago, otters were nearly eliminated by hunting. Sea urchins populations increased greatly and kelp forests nearly disappeared. Why? Because the kelp was eaten down to the bare rock by the hordes of sea urchins. The future of the kelp forest looked grim. Then sea otters were declared an endangered species and were protected from hunting. With hunters out of the picture, otters' populations recovered. Sea urchin numbers dropped dramatically. Kelp grew back, but now some otter populations are shrinking again because otters are being eaten by killer whales. To better understand why populations such as these change as they do, we turn to the study of population biology. Characteristics of populations. Several terms can be used to describe a population in nature. Three important characteristics of a population are its geographic distribution, density, and growth rate. A fourth characteristic, the population's age structure, will be discussed later in this chapter. Geographic distribution, or range, is a term that describes the area inhabited by a population. The range can vary in size from a few cubic centimeters occupied by bacteria in a rotting apple to the millions of square kilometers occupied by migrating whales in the Pacific Ocean. Population density is the number of individuals per unit area. This number can vary tremendously depending on the species and its ecosystem. The population of the saguaro cactus in the desert plant community shown in Figure 5-1, for example, has a low density, whereas other plants in that community have a relative high density. Population growth. Natural populations may stay the same size from year to year, but a population can grow rapidly, as sea otter populations did when they were first protected from hunting. Populations can also decrease in size, as otter populations are doing now because of the predation of killer whales. But just how do interacting factors such as these influence population growth? Generally, populations grow if more individuals are born than die in any period of time. For some organisms, such as the penguins in Figure 5-2, being born may actually mean hatching. Plants can add new individuals as seeds sprout and begin to grow. A population can grow when its birth rate is greater than its death rate. If the birth rate equals the death rate, the population stays more or less the same size. If the death rate is greater than the birth rate, the population shrinks. Sea otter populations grew when hunting stopped because their death rate dropped. Those same otter populations are shrinking now because killer whales have raised the death rate of the otters again. Immigration, the movement of individuals into an area, is another factor that can cause a population to grow. Emigration, with an E, the movement of individuals out of an area, can cause a population to decrease in size. Wildlife biologists studying changes in populations of animals such as a grizzly bear and wolves must consider immigration and emigration. For example, emigration can occur when young animals approaching maturity leave the area where they were born, find mates, and establish new territories. A shortage of food in one area may also lead to emigration. On the other hand, populations can increase by immigration as animals in search of mates or food arrive from the outside. Exponential growth. If a population has abundant space and food and is protected from predators and disease, then organisms in that population will multiply and the population size will increase. Let's conduct an imaginary investigation to understand how growth under ideal conditions might occur. Suppose you put a single bacteria in a petri dish, supply it with enough nutrients, and incubate the culture with the right amount of heat, moisture, and light. How will that population change over time? Bacteria reproduce by splitting in half. If the bacteria have a doubling time of 20 minutes, then within 20 minutes, the first bacteria will divide to produce 2 bacterial cells. 20 minutes later, the 2 bacteria cells will divide to produce 4 bacterial cells. After another 20 minutes, there will be 8 bacteria. In another hour, there will be 64 bacteria. And in just one more hour, there will be 512. And in just one day, this colony of bacteria will grow to an outstanding size. And this number, guys, is so big I don't even know how to pronounce it. What would happen if the growth pattern continued for several days without slowing down? Bacteria will cover our planet. Figure 5-3 shows a graph with the size of the bacterial population plotted against time. As you can see, the pattern of growth is a J-shaped curve. The J-shaped curve indicates that the population is undergoing exponential growth. Exponential growth occurs when the individuals in a population reproduce at a constant rate. At first, the number of individuals in an exponentially growing population increases slowly. Over time, however, the population becomes larger and larger until it approaches an infinitely large size. Under ideal conditions, with unlimited resources, a population will grow exponentially. With a doubling time of 20 minutes, some bacteria have the fastest rates of reproduction among living things. Populations of other species grow more slowly. For example, a female elephant can produce an infant only every 2 to 4 years, and then the offspring take about 10 years to mature. But as you can see in figure 5-3, in the unlikely event that all the offspring of a single pair of elephants survived and reproduced for 750 years, there would be nearly 20 million elephants. Logistic growth. Obviously, neither bacteria nor elephants cover the planet. This means that exponential growth does not continue in natural populations for very long. What might cause population growth to stop or to slow down? Growth slows down. Suppose that a few animals are introduced into a new environment. At first, as the animals begin to reproduce, the population increases slowly. Then, because resources are unlimited, the population grows exponentially. In time, however, the rate of population growth begins to slow down. This, this does not mean that the size of the population has dropped. The population is still growing, but at a much slower rate. As resources become less available, the growth of a population slows or stops. The general S-shaped curve of this growth pattern, called logistic growth, is shown in Figure 5-4 in a yeast population. Logistic growth occurs when a population growth slows or stops following a period of exponential growth. How might this happen? Population growth may slow down when the birth rate decreases, when the death rate increases, or when both events occur at the same rate. Similarly, population growth may also slow down when the rate of immigration decreases, the rate of emigration increases, or both. When the birth rate and death rate are the same, or when the rate of immigration is equal to the rate of emigration, then population growth will slow down or even stop for a time. Note that even when the population growth is said to stop, the population is still rising and falling somewhat, but the ups and downs average out around a certain population size. Carrying capacity. If you look again at Figure 5-4, you will see a dotted horizontal line through the region of the graph where the growth of the yeast population has leveled off. The point at which the line intersects the y-axis tells you the size of the population when the average growth rate reaches 0. That number, in turn, represents the largest number of individuals, in this case, yeast cells, that a given environment can support. Ecologists call this number the carrying capacity of the environment for a particular species. If you examine natural populations of familiar plants and animal species, you will find that many of them follow a logistic growth curve. In the natural world, there are many factors that can slow the growth of a population. The factors that limit population growth are discussed in the next section.